So we're going to be starting. Go ahead and open your Bibles to Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verse 1 is where we're going to be starting tonight. And we talked last week about how a Song of Solomon is a fascinating love triangle. And it's a fascinating love triangle. We talked about how that if we're going to write a romance, that it follows the pattern for a very successful romance, where you've got a young girl torn between who should she marry. A man who's very impressive to her, but yet he doesn't have all the qualities to make a good husband. And then here's another man who's maybe not quite as impressive, but he does have the qualities. And she struggles back and forth with who should I marry. So if we want to write a good romance, that's the formula we would follow. But in the Song of Solomon, while we have that formula, we have the Shulammite maiden who is in love with the shepherd boyfriend. When King Solomon comes along and begins to woo her and promise her riches and all kinds of fame, and she begins to struggle with who to marry. The main difference between our story, the Song of Solomon, and a good romance is this is about real people. These people really live. The Shulammite maiden was a young maiden. We've talked about how she might be anywhere from 12 to 16 years old. Of course, we all know King Solomon really existed. And this boyfriend is not a figment of her imagination. He is her boyfriend. So as we deal with the Song of Solomon, we're going to be studying this fascinating love triangle. But as we get into the Song of Solomon, we're going to see that the young Shulammite maiden faces a problem that many girls face today. And that is, she's like this young girl here who asks her mother. She says, "Mother, how old should I be before I marry for the first time?" Of course, this is kind of a play on the easy divorces and all the marriages that people have today. But this is the problem that the Shulammite has. She's not wanting to get married one time after another and just have marriage after marriage. And she's not wanting to get married and be unhappy in her marriage. She's wanting to have a successful marriage. So the problem she's dealing with is really one that is a universal problem. Who is it that I should marry that I might be married and enjoy a happy relationship? Now, as we start in Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verse 1, we're going to be introduced immediately to the Shulamite's dilemma. And if you'll look in your Bible, Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verse 1, let's see what it says. Verse 1 simply says, "The Song of Songs, which is Solomon's." All of your scholars, when you go back and read what they have to say about the Song of Solomon, they all agree that this is the title of this play. Of course, we talked about last week how this is a play to be acted out, and God has given it a title. So it is the Song of Songs, which is Solomon. This is a play that is based upon Solomon and one of his romances. So this first verse really is not part of our story, but it is a title. Now, as you begin to start the Song of Solomon in chapter 1, verse 2, and down through the end of verse 8, and this is like a play, so this is the first scene. And if you would like to, in your Bibles, to make it easier to understand, just up here at the beginning of chapter 1, verse 1, write Scene 1. This is the first scene. And you know when you go to watch a play and they pull the curtains back and you have a scene laid before you and the actors act in this setting and then the curtains close, and then when it opens again, they are somewhere different. Okay, that is what each scene in a Song of Solomon is. You imagine the curtains closing. When it opens again, they are somewhere else. So Song of Solomon chapter 1 through verse 8 is scene 1. And then beginning in chapter 1 verse 9, you can write up above that in your Bibles, is scene 2. And so this will be a dialogue taking place in a different setting. So as we begin Song of Solomon chapter 1 verse 2, we're going to see the Shulamite is going to speak, and she is going to tell us about her dilemma. She says in chapter 1 verse 2, "May he kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is better than wine. Your oils have a pleasing fragrance. Your name is like purified oil. Therefore the maidens love you. Draw me after you, and let us run together. The king has brought me into his chambers." Okay, we have the location of the scene. The king has brought her into his chambers. She is in his tent. We're going to find out later in our story that he is in the countryside inspecting the nut trees, and she is there in his tent being inspected by Solomon. So when the curtain opens, we're looking inside a tent, and she's sitting there, and all the maidens are around her, and they are talking with each other. Now, people who take the position that the Song of Solomon is talking about one man, that shepherd and the Solomon are the same man, they say that the Shulamite is here talking about King Solomon. But as we continue looking through this scene, you will notice down in verse 7, she speaks again about the same person that she's talking about in verses 2 and 3 and 4. She says, "Tell me, O you whom my soul loves, where do you pasture your flock? Where do you make it lie down at noon? For why should I be like one who veils herself beside the flocks of your companions?" So the man that she is talking about all the way through this scene is her beloved, her whom her soul loves. And she does not call him a shepherd, but she says, "Where are you taking care of the sheep?" He is somewhere taking care of the sheep. So she tells us what her beloved is doing. Now, I don't believe this is King Solomon, because if you will turn over in the Song of Solomon, over to chapter 6, and in chapter 6, this is where Solomon introduces her to all of his queens and maidens. And in chapter 6, verse 10, the queens ask, "Who is this that grows like the dawn, as beautiful as the full moon, as pure as the sun, as awesome as an army with banners?" So Solomon's queens, they want to say, "Solomon, where did you meet this beautiful woman? Where did you find her?" And in verse 11, Solomon tells her. He says, "I went down to the orchard of nut trees to see the blossoms of the valley, to see whether the vine had budded or the pomegranates had bloomed. And before I was aware, my soul set me over the chariots of my noble people." So he says, "I went down to inspect the vineyards, to see the nut trees and to see if they had blossomed." Solomon was not there pasturing sheep. He was there inspecting the vineyards. So back in chapter 1, when she says, "Where are you?" if it was Solomon, she would have said, "He's out in the nut trees. He's back in the vineyard. This is where he found her. This is where he was whenever he met her." So she is talking about someone different than Solomon. She is longing for someone who is pasturing his sheep. So when we go back to Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verse 2, realizing that in this scene she's talking about the same man all the way through, the one who is the shepherd. She says, "May he kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is better than wine." A couple of years ago, my husband taught the book of Proverbs in an adult class, and he got to a verse that was talking about kissing. And he stood there in front of all these people and he said, "What is kissing good for?" He says, "Now I like it, but for the life of me, what is kissing good for?" And as I listened to him, I thought, well, that's a man for you. Every woman knows what kissing is good for, but it's only a man that would ask, what is kissing good for? Here it is, if we put ourselves in her shoes to realize how she feels. This is a book to be felt and experienced. She is a young girl who has been brought into Solomon's tent. And this is not a tent like you and I go camping in. Wealthy people didn't live in tents or camp or go out in tents like you and I do. Their tents were huge. They might be bigger than the houses that we live in today. Their tents had many rooms. They had rooms for different things. As your family grew, you just added on another room to your tent. So a tent could just sprawl way out over a big area of land. Also, Solomon was a very wealthy man. During Solomon's time, silver was so common to Solomon that silver was like gravel to him. And so silver, he just threw silver around like nobody's business. The shields of his soldiers were made out of gold. Now, I haven't been able to find out. Surely they were lined with something because gold is not all that strong of a metal to be protecting them. But his soldiers went around with gold shields. So everything around Solomon was very beautiful, very magnificent. So here she is, a poor country girl, being brought into a very magnificent tent that is richer and prettier than anything she has ever seen before. And the king wants to find out if he wants to marry her. Now, how would you feel if you were in that type of situation? How do you think she would feel? She's scared, she's uncertain, and she's wanting comfort. And as she's thinking about what would comfort me the most, then she dreams of her shepherd boyfriend's kisses. May he kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. May he comfort me and make me feel better about what it is that is about to happen to me. He says, "For your love is better than wine." When you think about what wine does, the last time I taught this class, my husband and I were involved with counseling a young couple that were having some what I would call abuse in their family, some violence in their family. And they were also alcoholics. Both the man and the woman were alcoholics. And in the course of going through the training program at the women's shelter there in Santa Maria, they told me that lots of men use alcohol as an excuse to beat their wives or as an excuse to verbally abuse their wives, that they use this as an excuse. Well, I didn't know what I was doing. I was drunk or I was under the influence, and this is an excuse to them. And so as I was talking to this young man, I brought this up because he did have a drinking problem, and he also had a problem with violence. And I said, they say this at the shelter, that men use this as an excuse. And he says, oh, I don't. He says, that's not why I drink. He says, I drink because it makes me feel good. It makes me forget. And this is why a lot of people do drink, because it makes them feel good, it makes them forget. And so as the Shulammite is thinking about his love is better than a drink to make me feel better, to make me be more comfortable in this situation. And of course, when you use love in the place of alcoholic beverages, then you're on safer grounds. So she says, your love is better than wine, and your oils have a pleasing fragrance. Now, with the Jews, they lived in a hot country, and they used oils and perfumes. The Song of Solomon is just filled with oils and perfumes. And this is the way these people lived. They used lots of perfumes and lots of oils to counteract the hot, smelly, sweaty smells of their country. So she's saying, when I'm around you, you have a pleasant body odor. It's pleasant to be around you. Your oils have a pleasing fragrance. We might say, compare this to some of the aftershave commercials that we see on television. The way to a girl's heart is just wearing the right fragrance. And then she says, your name is like purified oil. So here it is. His name is something that appeals to her, and she is looking forward to the day when she is going to wear his name. So this tells you a little bit about the relationship they have. They kind of have an understanding. My mother tells the story about that when she was in high school out in California, one of her high school teachers got married during the course of a year. And after this teacher got married, all the girls in the class began to talk about, boy, why in the world would any woman marry a man by the name of Snodgrass? This teacher became Mrs. Snodgrass. And so these girls made fun of her and thought, oh, that is so horrible for a teacher to do something like that. Well, the very next summer, my mother's grandmother invited her to come to Oklahoma and help her work with the harvest crew, help her cook for the harvest crew for her husband and for her granddad and her grandmother. So my mother, while she spent the summer working for her grandparents, there was a young harvest hand who always wore sparkling clean white overalls. And he caught my mother's attention, and she began to date him. And after a while, a romance developed, and they got married. And my mother became Mrs. Snodgrass. And as I have grown up over the years, I've always noticed how proud my mother is to be Mrs. Snodgrass. All of us kids, as we've grown up, we've inherited this proudness, and we've been proud to be called Snodgrass. Now, a lot of times we would have to correct people's pronunciation of that name, but we were proud to wear that name. And that is what love does to a man's name. When a woman loves him, then his name, even if it's Snodgrass, it becomes like purified oil. So it's very easy to picture this Shulammite maiden dreamily writing start saying Mrs. Snodgrass, but Mrs. Shepherd over and over again. Shirley, did you ever do that when you were courting? Okay, so this is just kind of a universal characteristic of women, isn't it? Just practice writing over and over again. Mrs. whatever it's going to be, trying it out, seeing how it fits. So this is the way this maiden is. She loves him, and she has this feeling for him. And then she says, therefore the maidens love you. All of the other young maidens here out in the countryside that know him, they love him too. He's not some boy that nobody in their right mind would be interested in. He's got some certain characteristics and quality about him that make him attractive to a lot of girls. All the maidens love him, but she's the one that he has this relationship with. So then in her mind, and we talked last week about how a characteristic of teenagers are these mental conversations that they have. And so in her mind, she tells him, draw me after you and let us run together. So just come get me and draw me after you, and let's run away from here. Let's go away and just end what's about to happen. She says, the king has brought me into his chambers. Now you see the mental dilemma she's got. I love the shepherd. I want to go with him. Come get me. Come draw me away. But is she leaving? No, she's staying there. I want to find out a little bit more about Solomon. I want to test this relationship. Part of her wants to leave. Part of her wants to stay. So she stays. And as she is there making these statements either to herself or out loud, the maidens who wait upon Solomon are there waiting upon her, and they are aware of her uneasiness and her lack of excitement about being brought to King Solomon's tent. And these maidens, back where we were earlier in Song of Solomon chapter 6, where it's talking about who is the Shulammite maiden that you brought before us, up in verse 8, it says, there are 60 queens and 80 concubines and maidens without number. So here it is, Solomon had 60 wives, and a queen was simply a free woman, and a concubine was a slave that he had married. So he had married 60 women who were free women and 80 women who were slaves. And then there were maidens without number. There were just young women that you couldn't even count them. There were so many of them who were waiting to being taken into Solomon's harem. So these are probably who is speaking next in the Song of Solomon. These maidens that are waiting for Solomon to summon them and to have them be his wife. Then these are the maidens that we see their speech over and over again. Now, we know that a plurality of people are speaking because it says, we will rejoice in you and be glad. We will extol your love more than wine. So it is a group of people saying, we will do this. Now, in your books, I have down that I believe at the time when I wrote your books, in the revised volume 1s, that the maidens were talking about the Shulammite, how they were so excited about her, and they were excited that Solomon had brought her. Since then, I have learned from looking over Gary Martin's material that the pronouns in this section are masculine. So these women are talking about a man. So when they say, we will rejoice in you, that you is masculine. When it says, we will extol your love, that your is masculine. So they are talking about some man. Now these maidens have no reason to be talking about the shepherd. They do not know him. But the one they do know and the one they are waiting upon is Solomon. So here I think we have the dilemma between the Shulammite and the maidens. She has memories of the shepherds, but the maidens, they are excited about Solomon. They're maidens without number who are waiting to be taken in, and they are in love with Solomon. So you have here's a young country girl, and you can see the pressure upon her. She's in love with a shepherd, but everybody else is in love with Solomon. Everybody else thinks that Solomon is the perfect catch, and so there is tremendous pressure upon her to marry Solomon. And so let's see their speech. They say, we will rejoice in you and be glad. You're rejoicing in the shepherd, but we're rejoicing in King Solomon. No comparison in their mind. We will extol your love more than wine. Everybody knows Solomon's love is better than wine. Even though he spread it out over a lot of women, their view is it's better than wine. And we're going to see all the way through the Song of Solomon that the characters are going to continually make plays upon the previous speaker's speech or what he has done. And so this is what they're doing. Rightly do they love you. So it's right to love Solomon. He is this magnificent, powerful king, and we have this tremendous love for him. Now, the Shulammite maiden, and she is continuing in the same scene where she's in the tent talking to the maidens. She comes back and she talks to them. And what she tells them is that she is black but lovely. Just like we talked about last week, the self-consciousness that teenagers have about their appearance and this sort of thing. So this is where she is. She says, I am black but lovely, O daughters of Jerusalem, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. Now the tents of Kedar, their tents normally were woven out of goat hair, and these tents were made out of black goat's hair, so they were very black wool tents. So this is what she's comparing herself, very black. And she says, I am like the tent curtains of Solomon. Do not stare at me because I am swarthy. Swarthy is just another word for black. For the sun has burned me. My mother's sons were angry with me, but they made me caretaker of the vineyards. But I have not taken care of my own vineyards. So here it is, she's saying, I'm black. I haven't had time to primp and take care of myself and get out of the sun like you have, but I am still lovely. She has a good, healthy self-image. Now we might think, what did women know back then about beauty? I want to read to you a little bit out of an encyclopedia about what they did about beauty. Okay, this says that as far back as Sumerian times, they had painted kohl around their eyes to enlarge them and tinted their cheeks with red dyes. Certain women used grease paint, antimony ore for mascara, red paint, white lead as face powder, seaweed paint, possibly as an eyeshadow, so green eyeshadows, nothing new, and beauty plasters for face packs. Many of these preparations were unfortunately not waterproof. When you go out in the summer, said a Greek poet, 2 black rivets flow from your eyes. The sweat from your cheeks carries tricklets of rouge right down to your neck, and your hair turns gray from the powder on your forehead. Okay, and then as we continue, it says that the women spent a great deal of time and money on their face and hair. First thing in the morning, a woman would wipe away such remnants of face cream and bread paste, face pack, as the night in bed had left on her skin, and then settle down to the long process of having her hair done. Some treat it with lotions that make it shine like the midday sun, and some dye it reddish yellow, considering the natural color ugly. Red blonde hair had become fashionable as a result of Roman contact with certain tribes. And it said if they happened to be satisfied with black hair, they spend their husband's money on anointing it with all the perfumes of Arabia. And then there are iron implements heated over a gentle flame. So here you have all the curling irons that we have today. They had them back then. It says, which crimp the hair and twirl it into ringlets. What pains are taken to make it lie over the eyebrows. There is hardly any space left for the forehead. Graying hairs are ruthlessly plucked out. Some women wear a wig made from hair imported from India. For gray hair, Mesopotamian experts recommended a mixture of opium with a dash each of the gall of a black ox, a scorpion, and a pig, brewed up with the head of a black raven and the head of a stork. Now, we wonder about the chemicals in our cosmetics, but these women had a problem too. Okay, the Egyptians preferred a blend of laudanum, oil, cat's womb, and raven's egg. For baldness, they said it was best to rub into the scalp a salve made from the fat of a lion, a hippopotamus, a crocodile, a cat, a serpent, and an ibex. And then once her hair was dressed, she started to work on her face, an equally protracted business. The foundation was derived from the grease of sheep's wool, a kind of lanolin, and there were other creams and lotions with ingredients like barley meal, ground antlers, honey, and froth of red niter, and I have no idea what that is. Okay, for eyes, cheeks, brows, and lips, the Roman woman appeared to have used much the same preparations as those mentioned earlier. When the work of art was complete, it would have to be done again later in the day after her bath. All that remained was to select sufficient jewelry to adorn every part that was capable of being adorned, and to put on an outer tunic. And then it says even in the summertime they had green eye shades to protect their eyes from the sun. So cosmetics and adorning is really not anything new today. And so Miss Shulammite told these maidens, I haven't had time to do all of that. You've had time to primp and to put on all of this kind of makeup and stuff, but I'm just a poor country girl whose brothers made her work in the vineyard. She says, I am black but lovely. We want to stop and talk about this point for a little bit, because physical appearance is something that does attract boys. And it is something, it seems like, as soon as boys start, their hormones start to work and they start to think, well, maybe girls aren't so bad after all. That's when the girls begin to hog the bathroom and begin to really worry about their appearance. You can't even go to the store with a teenage daughter without her having to run to the bathroom and just make sure everything is exactly right. And you tell her, we need to leave in 10 minutes. That's not long enough. We're just going to the store. It doesn't matter. Everything either has to be perfectly in place or perfectly out of place, whatever the fashion happens to dictate. Well, beauty is important if you want to attract a boy's attention. And let's turn over to Proverbs 31, verse 30, to notice something about beauty. Because a boy will not get romantically involved or emotionally involved with a girl that he is not first attracted to physically, attracted to her beauty. And here in the Song of Solomon, he's comparing an older woman with younger women, with younger maidens. And in verse 29, in verse 30, it says, "But many daughters," talking about young women, "they have done nobly, they have done well, but you excel them all." You're an older woman who has accomplished what life is all about, and you excel them because they are still back at the beginnings of discovering what a woman is all about. So it says they've done well. It says, "Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised." Now these two qualities here of charm and beauty, every girl must have these two qualities if she is going to attract a young man's attention. But it is what happens to these two qualities that make them deceitful and vain. This charm is a quality that every marriage must have to be successful. Yet these young women have lost it. And in a later class, we're going to come back and we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about exactly what is involved in this type of charm. This is one of the three ingredients that every marriage must have to be successful. And so a young man, he's not going to get interested in a young woman if she does not have this quality. The danger here is these young women have lost it, whereas the woman of great price has not. Then he says, beauty is vain. Beauty is what attracts a young man's attention in the first place. This is what has attracted Solomon's attention to the Shulammite maiden. So beauty is something that is very important, but beauty is also something that is very vain. It is something that is not lasting, and to help us appreciate really how vain beauty is, I have a list up here of what we can expect to look forward to as we get older to show just how undependable beauty is. Now, in your 20s, beauty begins to get vain as early as your 20s. In your 20s, you begin to develop moles, or what are sometimes called skin tags. These are these little clear moles or skin tags that we get around, a lot of times around our neck. And if we leave them alone, then they just get bigger and they get blacker. I remember back when I was in my early 20s and I began to develop some of these. I was reading articles about skin cancer. So I went to the doctor and I said, "What about all these things that are starting to come on my neck and they're growing?" And you know what he had the nerve to say to me? He said, "You're just getting older. That's just part of old age." And so he burned them all off. And I've since learned this is really the easiest part of getting older to take care of. If you don't want to go to the doctor and have him burn them off, then while they're a little teeny, all you do is you grab a hold of them and you pull them off, and they won't come back. And that's easier than going to the doctor. So this is the easiest thing that's ever going to happen to us to take care of as far as aging. Fine lines in our 20s start to develop. We start to get on our forehead, around our mouth, and around our eyes. Then in your 30s, you have the fun thing of watching your eyebrows go wild. They just go every which way. You can't brush them. You can't do anything with them. If you start to pluck them, after a while, you don't have any left. So a lot of people just resort to trimming them and trying to control them and trying to maintain this look of youth. Your hair starts to turn gray in your 30s. Now, you're not going to be really gray, but you're going to start to find your first gray hairs. In your 40s, that's when your crow's feet around your eyes begin to increase, and you really notice them. You may not have had to wear glasses all your life, but this is also the time when your eyes no longer focus up close and you begin to need bifocals. Graying speeds up. Hair thins. You may discover a few bald spots. Fatty tissue begins to deposit around your waist, hips, and thighs. And your skin is continually changing. Your pores enlarge and your skin gets coarser. And about 50% of the women start to develop liver spots in their 40s. Then, when you turn 50, you're still going through changes. Up here, your skin got coarser. In your 50s, your skin gets thinner. And as a result, you have more wrinkles. There's more hair loss. In your 60s, your whole shape is starting to sag. Your stature gets shorter. And as your stature starts to get shorter, if you want to prevent this from happening in your 60s, you have to start working on that problem in your 40s. In your 40s, you have to be eating right. You have to be getting a lot of exercise to keep your bones healthy. Because if you wait till you're 60, it's too late. And then your individual hairs, but just your hair in general is getting thinner. Now your individual hairs are getting thinner, so you don't have that thick, luxurious head of hair that you used to have. Then in your 70s, all the above is accelerated. So beauty is vain. Beauty is what catches a young man's attention, but it's not going to last. If that's the only thing we've got going for us, then he says beauty is deceitful. We married these gals because they were beautiful, but beauty is deceitful because it's not going to last. It's going to change, and if that's all we've got, then these fellas are going to feel like they were deceived and it was deceitful. So really what we need to have is a balanced view like the woman of great price had in Proverbs 31, verses 21 through 22. And let's turn over there. In Proverbs 31, verses 21 through 22. And this woman in Proverbs 31 is an older woman. And we know that because up in verse 15, it says, she rises also while it is night and gives portion to her household, or gives food to her household and portions to her maidens. The maidens here are her daughters, and portions are jobs or assignments. She gets up early in the morning, and the reason why she has time to look after the needy and to teach and do other things is because she doesn't do all the housework. Her daughters are old enough that she can give them assignments and they can carry out these jobs. So she is old enough to have daughters old enough to take over the housekeeping so that she can go out and do other things. So she is an older woman. But her attitude in verse 21, it says, she is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. She makes coverings for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. So here it is, as she's getting older and she no longer can go out and attract a man with her beauty like a young woman can, she still pays attention to her appearance. She has a healthy, balanced view of looks. She does not place all of her hopes for marital happiness in her appearance. So she takes care of her appearance, but then she goes ahead and takes care of her attitude and the things that she is doing. I guess it's been about a year ago, I read an article about Debbie Reynolds, and I don't know how old Debbie Reynolds is now, but she sings and works in nightclubs, and so her appearance is very important to her. And Debbie Reynolds said that she spends about 50% of her time now chasing beauty. And she's talking about how much harder it is that she is getting older to keep up this appearance of beauty. And so she has to spend about 50% of every day working to achieve a youthful and a beautiful body. So a woman is going to have to make a choice, and she looks at how vain beauty is. She's going to have to think about how much time she's willing to spend fighting all of these things, or if she's going to just get on with her life and accomplish other things and let nature more or less take its course. But as we continue thinking about the Shulammite here, talking about how that she is black but lovely, she has a quality that when you boil it all down to what is beauty and what is sex appeal. Do you have sex appeal? Of course, this is what young women and older alike are wanting. In this article it says, sure, it helps to be beautiful, but every woman has that elusive quality of sex appeal within her. She has only to learn to let it out. And then it says down here, stand in front of the mirror, relax, smile. Take a good long look at yourself. If you like what you see, you probably have it. If you don't, then you probably don't. And this whole article went on to talk about that what is sex appeal? It is self-confidence. It is being happy with yourself. However God made you, it is being happy and having self-confidence. And this is exactly what the Shulammite had. She said, I am black. I don't have time to primp and put on all this makeup like you girls do, but I am lovely. She had self-confidence. She evidently had sex appeal because she has gotten Solomon's attention. He is interested in her, and she had this quality. Of course, this is what every young girl and older girl alike can have, is this quality of self-confidence. Now, as we continue in the Song of Solomon, we're still scene 1, we're still in the tent, she's still talking to the maidens, and what she's told them that she's black, but she's lovely. And then she's going to dream and ache for the shepherd, for the love of her soul. And then they're going to tell her, you are free to choose. You do not have to marry Solomon. Oh, and I probably should have told you this earlier, but I forgot. I'm not going to have a handout for you today like I did last time of the outline of what I'm going to be talking about. So you're going to be responsible for taking notes. And I apologize for not telling you that earlier. But anyway, back in Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verse 7. She says, I guess I need to get back to the right book here. Okay, she says, tell me, O you whom my soul loves, so she's dreaming of this person who is her beloved, where do you pasture your flock? Where do you make it lie down at noon? For why should I be like one who veils herself beside the flocks of your companions? So she's saying, you whom my soul loves, Tell me where you are. Where is it that you're pasturing your flocks? Where are you working? Where do you make them lie down at noon? Now, when she says make them lie down at noon, because we don't live around shepherds, a lot of times we don't know the characteristics of taking care of sheep. But this characteristic of making them lie down at noon is a characteristic of a very successful shepherd. This shepherd is able to take care of the sheep so that they will lie down at noon and rest. Sheep are very stubborn animals, and they will not lie down at noon if they do not have enough food. They will not lie down if they do not have enough water. They will not lie down if they are being bothered by pests, any kinds of bugs and things like this, tormenting them. And they will not lie down if they are afraid. So he is a man who is completely taking care of his job and taking care of it in a very good way so that she is able to say, where are you making your sheep lie down? He is successful in what he has chosen to do. I remember when my husband used to work at the radio station in Spokane, had a radio program, and they would have young men come in and work at the radio station from time to time. And he told me about a young man that one time when he went in to do the radio program, that this young man had the dash of his car sitting in the control room, and he was upholstering the dash of his car while he was supposed to be working there at the radio station. Well, needless to say, this young man did not last very long on that job because he was not a responsible worker. So this is something that's very important. What kind of a worker is a young man? Is he dependable? Can she rely on him? Is he going to be a good provider? And she sees that he is because his sheep are lying down at noon. And then she says, for why should I be like one who veils herself beside the flocks of your companion? Should I just go ahead and say, I love you, you're the one I want to marry? Should I be coy and just kind of accidentally go where the boys are and hope you'll notice me? Do girls ever do that? Cindy, did you ever accidentally go where the boys were? Never, huh? Do we believe that? Well, see, girls haven't changed. 3,000 years later, girls haven't changed. They still accidentally, on purpose, go where the boys are. And she's saying, should I do that? Or should I just go ahead and declare my love for you and end this scene with Solomon? Now, the maidens come along, and they can tell she's struggling with this. They're in love with Solomon. Every young maiden ought to be so thrilled and excited to be taken into Solomon's tent and be given the opportunity to marry him. And they can see that she's struggling back and forth with this. So in chapter 1, verse 8, they say, if you yourself do not know, most beautiful among women, go forth on the trail of the flock and pasture your young goats by the tents of the shepherds. If you don't know if you want to marry Solomon, if you're not happy here, well, you just go find this shepherd boyfriend of yours. You can. It's your choice. Now, we need to realize back at this time, their parents did a lot of times have a lot to do with choosing a mate. But the girl always had the right to accept or reject the one that her parents had found for her. They always asked the girl what her answer would be. You remember whenever Abraham sent his servant to find a wife for Isaac, and the servant and how she brought the water for his camels. And then he went and talked to her uncle and to her mother, and they gave their permission, and then they said, call the girl in that we may ask her what she wants to do. So they called her in after they had given their permission, and she had the choice of either accepting or rejecting that marriage match. And so the girl always had that choice. So the young maiden here, she has her choice. You could either marry Solomon or not. It's your choice. You can go back if you want to. Now, she's come this far, and she's not quite ready. She doesn't know what she wants to do, but she's not quite ready to give King Solomon up. Now, picture in the play, the curtains close. Everybody scurries behind the stage to change the scene. The curtains open, and we have a new scene. Now, this scene 2, takes place in the tents still, but it is in the dining hall. She is there eating supper with King Solomon, and he is wooing her. Now, it's not going to be some kind of camp meal like what we're used to. Solomon, in the encyclopedias, it talks about just the enormous amount of animals that he bought on a daily basis to feed the people that worked for him and that waited on him. Very luxurious, magnificent food was always set before Solomon. So she is eating at a dinner table with the man who considered silver too common, whose all of his eating utensils were gold. She is surrounded by gold. She is surrounded by a fabulous tent and an ornate settings and furniture here. So she is in a very luxurious scene eating with Solomon. Talking about a man ever whining and dining a woman, well, Solomon is doing this for her in a way that we cannot quite imagine. So as Solomon comes along and he himself has entered the scene, then he is going to make certain proposals to her. The first proposal that Solomon is going to make to her is he's going to tell her that she is like his mare. You look in chapter 1, verses 9 and 10. Solomon speaks. He says, "To me, my darling, you are like my mare among the chariots of Pharaoh." Now, if our boyfriend told us we reminded him of a nag, we probably wouldn't get very excited. But here it is, she lives in the Shulammite Valley, and in one of the towns here in the Shulammite Valley, Solomon has his stables where his horses are, part of his horses at least, are being raised. And she is used to seeing all of Solomon's horses. And horses were very important to Solomon, and he is paying her a very high compliment. He's saying, he says, "You're like my mare among the chariots of Pharaoh." Pharaoh can line up all of his chariots and all of his fine horses, but my little mare, she stands out. She's the best of all of them. And that's the way you are. You're the best of the best. And so he is really paying her a very high compliment. So she is like his mare. Then he promises her luxuries in verse 11. And this is the maidens again speaking, because it uses the plural we. So the maidens are still there hovering over Solomon and the Shulammite. And they say, "We will make for you ornaments of gold with beads of silver." So here it is, we're promising her all kinds of fancy jewelry. And just think about what that means. You know, if our husband would offer us an endless wardrobe and just jewelry that we can't even imagine, expense is no consideration. Why, we'll just make you be the most beautiful thing that there is. And so they offer her these fancy ornaments. Now, when you think about this sounds like this is really kind of neat to be offered all these beads and ornaments of gold. But if you watch the movie about Elvis Presley and Priscilla, in the movie you saw that after Elvis Presley took her away from her parents in Germany and brought her back over to Hollywood, the first thing he did was he set about changing her. He completely changed her clothes, and if you go back and you see the old pictures of him, you see the exorbitant bouffant hairdo that she had. And of course, bouffant hairdos were the style back then, but he even went more bouffant than anybody else. He carried things to an extreme, and he completely made her over. In the book, Elvis and Me, she tells about how that one time she went out and bought a dress on her own, and he made her take it back. He wouldn't let her wear it. He had no respect whatsoever for her taste in clothing. He wanted her to be what he wanted her to be. He made her dye her hair jet black like he dyed his, and just completely changed her over. Then after she got away from him, you see the pictures of her today, how she completely changed physically, how she went back to being herself, acting and dressing the way she wanted to do instead of being what he wanted her to do. And she talks about in the book how him making her over into his image of the beautiful woman really was bad for her psychologically. It had a bad effect upon her. When you read about Elizabeth Taylor and her marriage to the senator, when she was campaigning for him, all of his political advisors told her that a politician's wife does not wear purple. Of course, you know purple is Elizabeth Taylor's trademark. And so they wouldn't allow her to wear purple and really regulated her clothes because now she was a politician's wife and everyone was watching her. And she tells in an article about her how that she lost her identity because she couldn't be herself. She couldn't dress her way. And in trying so hard to please him, she lost her identity and began to have mental problems as a result of this. So this wanting to make a woman over sounds great, but it may not be so great in the end if it causes the woman to lose her identity and he is beginning to change her too much. So while she's at King Solomon's table, they're making all these promises of luxuries to her. Then she's going to do what she does all the time, and that is she's going to have memories of the shepherd. In her mind, she's going to compare what Solomon is saying and doing with similar circumstances with the shepherd. So in verse 12, it says, while the king was out at his table. So this tells us where this scene that we're watching, where it took place. They were sitting at the table, dining together. While he was at the table, my perfume gave forth its fragrance. My beloved is to me a pouch of myrrh, which lies all night between my breasts. My beloved is to me a cluster of henna blossoms in the vineyards of En-gedi. So here it is. She is in this midst of this very ornate, beautiful dining hall, eating with Solomon, eating with gold silverware, drinking out of a gold cup, and the perfume that she has on gives its aroma off, and that smell makes her remember the shepherd. Now, psychologists say that smell has this ability. Certain smells either bring good memories or bad memories to your mind. Now, I personally do not have a sense of smell. I never ever remember smelling anything in my whole life. And so the only thing I know about smells is what people tell me or what I read. And the Song of Solomon is just filled with smells. So things I'm going to be sharing with you about smells are things that I have read or people have told me. But smell, making us have memories, is a part of it. So she says, my perfume gave forth its fragrance, and I thought of the shepherd. And what she thought about him, or her beloved, as we know who is the one who pastures his sheep, she says, he's like a pouch of myrrh which lies between my breasts. Now the Jews, they lived in a hot country, and you know at night, a lot of times and when it's hot, we turn on the fan and the cool air flows over us, and that helps us go to sleep at night. Well, the Jews didn't have fans to turn on to help them go to sleep in their hot country. And so what they would do is they would take little pouches of flower petals or herbs, and they would tie them up into a little pouch, and they would tie them around their neck, and they would wear them to bed at night so that as they're laying there and they're hot and sweaty and sticky, they are smelling this sweet smell, and it helps them to go to sleep. So this was their custom, to carry a cluster of flowers. So she's saying, my beloved is to me like these very comforting fragrances, something that makes me feel good, something that takes away the bad. And so she remembers him while she's dining with Solomon. Then Solomon is going to come back. He's still talking to her while she's thinking these thoughts. And he says, how beautiful you are, my darling. How beautiful you are. Your eyes are like doves. Now, when he calls her my darling, we're going to find that all the way through here, Solomon calls her my darling, and the shepherd only one time calls her my darling. My darling was kind of a light term, like we sometimes use the word honey. Well, honey this or honey that, and we may not really mean that somebody is our honey, but just a term of affection that is a light term of affection. So he's speaking to her really in a very casual way when he calls her my darling. He says, how beautiful are you, my darling. How beautiful you are. Your eyes are like doves. And of course, the dove was to the Jews always a symbol of peace. And so as he looks at her eyes, he sees peace and contentment reigning there. And we're going to see this expression about her eyes in here several times. Solomon is going to talk about her eyes again. The way a woman looks at a man is extremely important. A woman tells a man a lot before she ever opens her mouth by the way she looks at him. And so Solomon is he's noticing this about her. It's something that is capturing her attention. Now she, after hearing Solomon say that, then she immediately goes back to her memories of the shepherd and compares this to what the shepherd had said. And in verse 16 it says, how handsome you are, my beloved, and so pleasant. Indeed, our couch is luxuriant. The beams of our houses are cedars, our rafters cypresses. So here it is. She's in the midst of this fabulous tent, surrounded by all this luxury of Solomon's, and she's thinking about the shepherd. And Solomon has told her how beautiful she is, and she says, but my shepherd, how handsome you are, and you're the one I love. You're so pleasant. Our house may not be quite as luxurious and as elegant as Solomon's camping tent is, but yet we have beams of cedar, and our rafters are cypresses. And of course, these are things of the outdoors and of the country folks. So here it is to her, a shack in the woods, because she loves the shepherd. Then it is wonderful. It is glorious because she loves him. And so she realizes that here all the magnificence that Solomon has to offer me, if I do not love him, then what's it going to be worth? It's not going to really give me happiness, but yet the humble dwelling that the shepherd can give me, then this is going to make me be a happy individual because of the love that we have for each other. So we're going to stop right there. I'm going to take a 10-minute break. You'll come back at 8:20 by the clock back there, and we'll see if we can figure out something about this furnace up here.